Who is DSI? DSI is short for Dynamic Solutions International. We were founded in 1973, so we have over 47 years of experience dealing with high availability, high performance architectures. We specialize in enterprise and enterprise class backup, disaster recovery for, as you will see, banks, various businesses, and governments worldwide. The DSI focuses on delivering very stable, very high available backup and recovery solutions in our market space. Our platforms are qualified for IBM Open Systems, VMware, and many other platforms as well. And we are excited to be working with you and our partner at IBM. To talk about ProtecTIER. What happened to it? Why is it being replaced? What is it being replaced with? And how do I get to this new product from ProtecTIER, or for that matter, any other VTL that you may have out? IBM purchased a company called Diligent Technologies in 2008. At that time, Diligent really was known for their deduplication technology, and that's really what the merger was all about. The VTL product, IBM announced the withdrawal of the ProtecTIER product in 2018. So basically, they had the product for about 10 years. At that time, they announced that the end of sale would be November 24th, 2018, with the end of support coming this year, November 30th of 2020. They selected DSI to supply the replacement for ProtecTIER. Why did they do that? Well, as we mentioned earlier, DSI has been around for 47 years. We're a stable company with quite a long history in the backup and recovery, as well as IBM and other extensive marketplaces. The IBM Lab Services brought in the DSI VTLs and ran tests on them. We loaned them a number of our products. In all cases, the DSI VTLs exceeded those of the ProtecTIER product that IBM had currently been selling. Add to that, we weren't new to the IBM iBase. We already knew how to interface with the IBM I, and some of that will become clearer here in just a second. But DSI Lab Services, we went through quite a few months of testing. This was long before the announcement was even made. So IBM did have a plan. They were working on this before they made the announcement. They looked at several options, but again, because of our host software, because of the performance that we proved, we were the best solution for replacing ProtecTIER. The IBM I will pick up and work with the DSI VTL just like it did with a ProtecTIER or a physical tape environment that you might have had before. The DSI VTL has been tested not only to do backup and recovery, but to fully restore a IBM I system through an IPLD, which you can do a bare metal reboot directly from the key here is if customers have not been using automation prior to this, if they've been using just, for example, what we would call a bare drive, a non-automated drive, there are new advantages and new capabilities that they will get by going to a virtual tape library system, because now the availability is there to fully automate their entire backup and recovery environment. So what is this replacement? What does it look like? The current series is called the iDSI520 series, but know that we are on Gen 14 of the hardware platform we use. We do not skimp on our hardware. Everything that we do is enterprise level. not basic level. So we're using Intel Xenon processors, high-end Intel processors. We're using SAS, not SATA drives. And all of those drives are either RAID 6 or mirrored configurations, again, for reliability and recoverability, depending on their configuration. All of the systems use 16 gigabit fiber channel ports. All the power supplies, even in the smallest unit, is dual N+1, meaning if you lose a power supply, you can hot plug replace it without bringing the system down. We are currently supplying standard 1 gigabyte network interfaces, but 10 gigabyte network interfaces are available as an option, and you can get those either in the RJ45 or in the SFP, the fiber optic cable type of environment. All of the primary data storage in these units uses self-encrypting drives. So again, data at rest is encrypted. When we replicate between our units for a remote copy, the data is encrypted as it moves between those units. This is we call data in security in flight, encryption in flight. If you use an option that we have available, which is putting physical tape on the back end of our VTL systems, the VTL can encrypt those drives as well. So another level of encryption at rest. All of our models have what's called a trusted platform module, except for those countries where export is not allowed, up the latest version, TPM 2.0. And while they are Linux-based, just like the ProtecTIER was, this is not a general purpose server. This is a dedicated purpose appliance. It has been hardened with the latest Linux patches available at the time of shipment. And so there is nothing extra on these devices that might be an issue in a secure environment. So let's look at the various models that we have available. Starting from the small end, we have the iDSI520 D04. This unit is only 1U, so it fits in a very compact environment. The D04 has 4 terabytes of deduplication storage. Now that's its raw storage. When we talk about the deduplication storage, that's the raw storage available for storing deduplicated data. It is licensed in 1 terabyte increments, so you can go 1, 2, 3, or 4 terabytes in this unit. Buy it, for example, at 2 terabytes and have room for expansion to 4 terabytes just by increasing. This unit at 4 terabytes of raw storage can store up to 20 terabytes of IBM I data, or IBM I virtual tapes, if you will. Assuming that 5-to-1. And again, most customers get better than that. This unit has 2 16 gig fiber channel ports, which are normally used as input from the IBM I hosts, their target mode. And again, just like we said earlier, it can have, the default is 1 gigabyte network ports. It can have 10 gigabyte road. There's also an option for a SAS physical backup tape on this unit, but because it is limited HBA slots, you can either have the 10 gigabyte network port or SAS. You can't have both on this particular model. The next model up is the iDSI520 D12. We are now into a 2U platform, and this is the standard size you would see on a lot of your rack mount servers. It has 12 terabytes of deduplication storage, and again, it's licensed in 1 terabyte increments. But again, using that 5-to-1 default deduplication ratio, this unit can store 60 terabytes of IBMI virtual tapes. This unit has 4 of those 16 gigabyte fiber channel ports and does have the option for adding 2 more ports into this unit. It also has the option for the 10 gigabyte network ports, and then in this case you can have both. You can have a SAS physical tape in the back end of this. But as I note here, fiber channel, one of those 4 or 6 fiber channel ports could also be used if you happen to have fiber channel tape capacity. One of those ports could be used to talk to a fiber channel. The next step up from the D12 is the D24. You'll notice it looks very similar to the D12, and that's because it is essentially the similar unit, but with a different disk configuration. This unit has 24 terabytes of deduplication storage. It is again, using that 5-to-1 default deduplication ratio. We are up to now 120 terabytes of virtual tape, IBMI virtual tapes stored in this 2U unit. It now has, by default, 6 of those 16 gigabyte fiber channel ports for allowing hooking up to more of the IBMI LPARs. And again, both the 10 gigabyte and SAS physical tapes are options on. The D48 again is essentially similar to the D24, but a different disk architecture. 48 terabytes of deduplication storage, which again in that 5-to-1 deduplication default ratio, that's 240 terabytes of IBMI virtual tapes on this single 2U unit. And again, the same options for 10 gigabyte network and or SAS physical tape if you need it. At the higher end, where we might have a very, very large number of LPARs, a very, very large number of storage required, we have what we call the node units. And the node units are set up where each node has different responsibilities and capabilities, spreads the workload out, if you will. The first node that we want to talk about is the VTL head node. This, in essence, is where the data comes into from the IBMI LPARs. It is, again, a 2U platform, but it has 12 16 gigabyte fiber channel ports. A number of those are used to talk to the IBMI host, but a number are also used to talk to storage. Again, this system does have the 10 gig network option available, but one critical difference from the appliances that we've previously talked about, the EV0 units do have a high availability option. And by that I mean we can put multiple EV0s in parallel with each other, and if one EV0 should fail, another EV0 will automatically pick up and take over the processing of that backup environment. There is a second node we call the EVD that is the deduplication node. And again, what this unit does is it reads the data from those storage systems in what we call the landing space for the VTL, and deduplicates that data into the deduplication storage in that V5000 or V7000 storage. This unit has 4 16 gig fiber channel ports. These ports are primarily for use for accessing, again, the external storage, the V5 or V7000 units. We can put 2 additional ports on if the bandwidth is required for the particular workload. These units come in the 500 terabytes size and an over 500 terabyte size. Primary difference being the amount of memory that the units store. Okay, and again, for workload and redundancy, just like with the EV0s that had a high availability, the EVDs can have multiple units as well. I'm going to talk about one other component that will become critical as time goes on here, and that is our restore software. What is restore? Well, we've talked about hardware appliance systems and hardware node systems, but everybody is talking about cloud these days. And we have a virtualized version of the VTL software that can reside either on your own virtualized systems or in the cloud in a virtualized environment. These essentially have all of the features of the hardware VTLs except where that feature is hardware based. So all of the features having to do with deduplication, having to do with replication, having to do with archiving, having to do with all of the features that we provide as a VTL are available within this product. Currently supporting VMware and Hyper-V, and of course the cloudy versions of those, AWS and Azure. Stay tuned to this channel. There will be another announcement here very shortly for a cloud system that you might also recognize. Storage on these systems is part of the vSAN, as it's sometimes termed, within the VMware, Hyper-V, or other cloud or other environment. The one important feature to recognize here is that we can replicate to and from the restore VTLs with our hardware VTLs. So why is this important? In the real world, quite often, to get the backup done quickly, you'll want to have a hardware VTL at your primary site. But if you're following the backup industry norm of what's called 3-2-1, which is I have 3 copies of my data, 1 primary, 1 backup on site, and a 3rd backup off site, you'll want to replicate that data off site. In the old days, we used to carry a tape off site. Today, we can take the data that you've backed up to, for example, our VTL, and replicate it to another VTL. Not everybody wants to have a DR site or needs a DR site, so you can do that now by placing a copy of the DSI Restore software in the cloud and replicating from your VTL on-site to a restore copy in the cloud. This gives you the flexibility of doing just about any type of backup environment that makes sense for your organization. Okay, so we've gotten your interest peaked. There's a replacement for the ProtecTIER. We've gone over the various hardware models and virtualized models. I want one. But I've migrated from other systems before. It was very painful. How do I get from, say, ProtecTIER or other VTL to a DSI VTL? And it's actually easier than you think. If you look at the diagram here, you'll notice that the DSI VTLs have the ability to connect a VTL or a physical tape library for that matter to the back end, as we call it, of the DSI VTL. You can then go to the VTL console and select various tapes for import. It will then talk to the ProtecTIER as a library, mount those tapes, and read them into the DSI VTL. This is important because you're not using dupe tape or any other IBMI function. This is strictly happening within the ProtecTIER and the DSI VTLs. No IBMI host cycles are being used. The important thing to note that as soon as that tape is imported, it is available to the IBMI via the DSI VTL. Very simple, very straightforward process, and again, not using host cycles. But some of you are talking about systems that have thousands of tapes. In fact, we have recently done conversions of 20 and 30,000 tapes. I'm not sure someone wants to sit at that console and select all of those tapes and bring them into the DSI VTL. There has to be an easier way, especially with larger and larger tapes. Earlier we mentioned that DSI has specific software for the IBMI host that helps manage the VTL. We call this the DSI VTL conductor. The conductor is if you will, an adjunct or an add-on product to the VTL environment that works from the IBMI host. And what it does is it will integrate with, if you have BRMS, it will integrate with BRMS and fully automate the various processes that a VTL can do. One of those processes is importing, or in this case, migrating data from an older VTL, be it a ProtecTIER or a different vendor VTL or a physical library, for example, you may have. And it will go in, look at the BRMS database, and based on your selection criteria, select those tapes for import and migrate those into the DSI VTL. Conductor is smart enough, it knows all the various configurations that BRMS may have. It can work with a BRMS standalone systems, it can work with BRMS network systems, it can work with both of those together at the same time if your configuration is set up that way. This has proved to be such an easy mechanism that IBM Lab Services has licensed this product for doing their migrations when they are contracted to do the migration between ProtecTIER and a DSI IBMI system. So let's talk a little bit more about Conductor. Is migration all that it does? Absolutely not. Migration is just a side benefit of many of the features that the conductor. When virtual tapes came along, various vendors came up with new features. If you get a VTL without the conductor product, you will get the ability generally to mount and dismount and move to vault. But very few of the other features will be available in this environment. So DSI wrote VTL Conductor to allow the IBMI host to have full control of all of these capabilities and enhancements that a virtual tape can do for you. It can automate, as we just talked about, it can automate the migration of previous VTLs or physical tape libraries into a DSI VTL. It will automatically monitor the maintenance and the media inventories. Again, parameters can be set up such that it knows how much needs to be available at any given time and will create as need be additional media within the rules that you've specified. It can recognize inconsistencies between media management software and the virtual library. What does that mean? Well, maybe the host was down, or a different LPAR was down when certain media was created, and then when that LPAR comes up, and in this case, media management, we're really talking about BRMS here. It will come up and said, tape 123, it's supposed to be backup A, but it's showing as backup B. Conductor can automatically go into BRMS and correct those inconsistencies without, be it caused by a human or by some automation error. For systems not using BRMS, we also have a piece of software we call Tracker. We'll talk about that in a second. That is basically a mini BRMS, if you will. It does not have the networking features. It does not have all the bells and whistles. But for some people, a simpler media management system is required, or is all that is required, and we have a simpler one that works with Conductor that we call Tracker. The list of capabilities for Conductor gets longer. We can manage the accounts. We can manage the different resources in those accounts, even in hierarchical configurations. That's a good word. We can manage the account servers. In this case, we can work with, while Conductor may have a primary LPAR that is working on, it can work on hundreds of other LPARs at the same time and manage all those environments. As we mentioned earlier, if BRMS is either running in standalone or networked mode, we can handle those environments, even mixed environments in that environment. We can manage the virtual fiber channel clients. In other words, we can handle the interface between the IBMI and what IBMI sees as the virtual drive, and make sure that that connection is correct and keeps it up and running. We can create and configure virtual tape libraries. Why is that important? Well, there is a virtual console that you have with the DSI VTL, but it may not be familiar to most people. It's got a different user interface. If we supply this capability through the IBMI interface, it becomes much easier to use and can be controlled in an IBMI configured account environment. We can manage resource environments, which LPAR gets which sets of tapes, for example, and which hosts can get access to which library. We can create the policies under which certain tapes get deduplicated or not, depending on your requirements. These policies include not just how it's deduplicated. In this case, it could be what we call inline deduplication or post deduplication. But we can also include in those policies replication capabilities or archive capabilities. Replication means send my virtual tape to another VTL or restore copy somewhere else. Archiving says I can send a copy of this tape to a physical tape, or as we're going to be announcing shortly, I can send it to a cloud repository, and that will be pretty exciting. And of course, we can add the capability of doing reports above and beyond. Since we're adding new capabilities, we have reporting systems within Conductor